Don Lubach with the Ombuds office at UC Santa Barbara. I try to keep these videos fairly short. This one is not short, and it has to do with the quality and the topics covered by our fantastic guests. And those include Kai Harper, a 2017 graduate from UCSB, a fellow who grew up on the Esalen campus and served as a star teaching assistant for teams that I used to run when I was a lecturer with the Gewurz Graduate School of Education. That's how I know Kai, and how I've recently met Adam Rumack and Miriam Joy Jones. Their work is through a company called We Are Open Circle. Their work is very close to Ombuds' work in that it involves running towards, not away from, conflict and listening. I originally recorded this preparing for Ombuds Day, and then just life happened, and I just picked it back up and watched it. In addition to its relatively long length for the videos that we do, the guests, Miriam and Adam and Kai, are folks who are not afraid of long pauses, even in front of the camera. I have to admit, I edited down some of their pauses because it's my own thing. I was uncomfortable sometimes with that length of space, but I tried to leave some of them in. And you can, if you go to We Are Open Circle, you will find video, and you'll get to experience how thoughtful these three are. So, without further ado, and without pausing too much myself, I'm happy to share an interview with Miriam Joy Jones, Adam Rumack, and Kai Harper. And so, could one of you jump in and give us the overview of what is We Are Open Circle? And we don't have choreography, so I could point to one of you.
They're gonna pass the buck, man.
I'll jump in, and then if
okay.
We'll probably do a lot of yes ands on this call,
Great.
and that's how we roll. We Are Open Circle. Essentially, we help organizations and individuals adapt to rapid and disruptive change. Miriam and I started working together about 6 years ago. And then we founded We Are Open Circle in a time of rapid change for us, where we were leaving executive positions at a significant nonprofit and had tried building an adaptive organization there, and were very, very successful using different tools from deep listening practices to management and operational design. To kind of forms of what might be considered deep democracy, so decision making using collective practices. And it was a time of rapid growth for the organization, and we realized when we with our success that this was something that could be used in many different environments, given our backgrounds and our experience in different types of organizations, to help them adapt to rapid change. And now we live in a time where I think everybody can agree. It's not a conversation that we have to have up front with people, that things are changing quickly, that we're all needing to kind of increase our capacities to adapt and change and find new ways, not just new ways to do things, but new ways to think about and understand what we're doing and what's happening around us.
So. But part of what you do is working with conflict, and that's where we overlap. So as an Ombuds, I work, we talk about conflict as kind of what we do. And I was so refreshed. It was so refreshing for me to see in the description of your work that you embrace conflict. And yeah, Miriam, could you tell me about that a little bit, about conflict and why we should not be afraid of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's even interesting thinking about that paradigm shift from seeing conflict as something to be afraid of and something that where you have to fix it. So if you're in conflict with someone, it's something to fix. And yeah, we take a very different approach. And so conflict, and when you perceive there's tension in your environment, that actually that's a doorway towards transformation. And if an organization or in a relationship, if you're looking to be able to adapt and to transform, when you know that the opposite is getting stuck and being in resistance, continued resistance, then you begin to see that tension as an invitation, rather than that tension is something that needs fixing. So yeah, that's how we really see it. And it really does work, because I was one of those people. I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid I would run the other million miles the other way. And now I really do see that, knowing that that tension can be that means through which we can walk together through change. I mean, that if we don't do that, that stuckness actually emphasizes these polarities that we're seeing in our culture and society and in many organizations.
And the other thing you
Can I
all
add to that?
do, yes, and I have a question for you coming up too. So so go ahead and add on, and then I have a question for you.
I love it. Well, so I came on to work with We Are Open Circle last spring. And so my experience is really like getting to come on with fresh eyes and see how it all plays out. And one of the things I've noticed with listening and the way it relates to conflict is so often conflict initially appears so binary. It's that immediate, oh, there's a right person, a wrong person, there's something going on. And what I've noticed through this practice of deep listening, of really letting the stories unfold and making sure that every individual has a voice, right? That they have a voice that needs to be heard, and it's a part of the puzzle. And the more we listen, the more that we allow things to unfold, the more kind of complex and in some ways beautiful it becomes, right? Because we see, what may have appeared as a black and white thing to begin with is actually much, much, much more complex. And there's systems involved. There's so many different factors at play. And so what initially seems like just two people angry at each other actually becomes a really wonderful example of what's going on and what's the temperature, what's actually happening in an organization, team, culture, whatever it is. So.
Right. But to get to the beautiful part of conflict, listening is required and attention is required. And I'm under the influence of just yesterday, I watched the Netflix documentary everyone's talking about the social dilemma and networks. And I find my own attention is so distracted, and I'm trying to work to train it using some inner practices, which are hard for me to do. And Kai, years ago, Kai knows this, we were teaching a class and we did an experiment where we had 200 first-year students have a moment of silence before class, a minute of silence. And I couldn't handle doing that. So I essentially hired Kai to quiet everyone down and focus their attention. Can you tell me about the attention part of your work, and how are you working with the busiest people in the world? Because you're working all over the world. Miriam's in Sydney right now, and two of you are in Northern California, I believe. How are you helping us out in the world get control of our attention? Maybe you want to start with that, Kai, since I see you as an attention expert, and then maybe Adam wants to jump in.
Well, thank you for that. I'm an attention expert because it's there's this old adage that goes, we teach what we most need to learn. And because my attention's often all over the place. And it just means that I needed to keep relearning it. Like, I'm the worst student of it, so I have to keep coming back, and that's how I became a teacher of it. So I think it's just really amazing what simple tools can engage our awareness in a different way. And so when you say, oh, how do you engage the busiest people in the world? Well, it's like, it's actually not much different from engaging with a room full of 18-year-old freshman students, and really what it becomes is just, how do we bring in these small exercises to just try it, to just get into the experience of it. I mean, so much of this work is inherently experiential. And what we're finding while working remote and doing all this stuff is we can do it on a screen, which, is kind of conflated often, or people thought, oh, well, if you're remote or if you're on a screen, there's no way you can have mindfulness. And even just taking that simple moment of, what is it like to breathe? What is it just like to breathe for a minute, for whatever it is? I found that even the busiest individuals, or the individuals who are like, oh no, I would never do that, they drop in inherently. There's something universal about what it is to pause and take a moment and be in simple awareness, and to have that experience. So it's really the same techniques, and that's what we do is there's the relating part, there's listening, and there's the external listening, but there's the internal listening piece as well, right? We all need to become aware of our internal surroundings, just as we engage with our external surroundings.
Right. And Adam, do you find yourself when you work with your clients, it sounds like Kai's saying you just ask, you just demand of your people you're working with to slow down and check in. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, and I had a bunch of ideas popping up as Kai was talking, so I'm filtering through those right now. And Miriam and I made an agreement that we would pause before and after every question to keep our cadence. So I'm doing that right now.
Yeah, I do have to say that watching the two of you on your professional videos is so lovely and so authentic that you don't edit out the pauses. And I love how you look at each other like, okay, I'm going to go here, right? You know, there might be some poking of each other under the camera that I don't see, but I love how you present together.
Yeah. You know, I my attention as I'm sitting here keeps getting drawn back to this image behind me.
Right.
And I think a lot about attention in wild places. And I think that you don't have to put, we think back to our ancestors, they weren't challenged to be focused on one thing. You know, there was a way that if we were walking through this wilderness that's pictured behind me, we would be aware completely of everything that's happening around us. So the capacity to include everything is a natural human capacity. Maybe some of us have not exercised that muscle for a while. And then let's say, imagine that we were hunters or gatherers, our attention would be tuned into our purpose in that wild landscape. And we would become hyper-focused on that one thing, whether it's finding the berries, which grow all around me right now outside these windows, or whether it was the animal that we're harvesting for food. So we have this capacity as humans to both include everything and to become very focused. And oftentimes it's our environment that will demand that of us. And I think lacking that environmental demand, we have other tools and techniques like mindfulness or meditation. And so when we work with groups, the easiest way is to put people in an environment where where there's a lot going on, right? So, and this is in the stories that they hear from other people. It's the invitation to include, as Kai said, their internal environment, the thoughts that are coming up, the feelings, sensations that they're having in their bodies, or the memories that are popping up. And in this sort of human wilderness that we invite people into, there's not really a demand there to focus on one thing. But there's an invitation to be aware of all that's happening inside and outside in this, let's call it a wilderness right now. And then allow ourselves to be drawn into that something which compels us. And, you know, in a world where, when we're thinking back to the social dilemma, where opinions are very cheap, they can be shared in a quick Twitter post in the middle of the night, and then consumed by hundreds of thousands or millions of people. This opportunity to allow ourselves to be drawn into stories which are rich and full doesn't really require demand. It's an opportunity that we create for people, and we try not to make this separation between that singular focus and the inclusive focus or inclusive attention that humans have the capacity for. So we talk about that in terms of an ecosystem of awareness and awareness of what's drawing us in at any given time when we're listening to another. And that can be true for the very busy executives. It can be true in the prison environments that I've worked in. It can be true in a family or a friend relationship as well.
Good. Yeah, Miriam, I imagine if you were standing next to Adam right now, you would pause and then say something too, I imagine.
It's an invitation to a vitality, because actually what happens in the social dilemma, in simplifying everything and putting it in memes, is cutting out the complexity of life. but it's in the complexity of life and in our capacity to welcome that complexity in, that we get that vitality, that sense of thriving. And that's really what Adam and I is at you know, when we're doing the mission of our organization, it's let's come back to that thriving life that we see in the photo behind Adam, you know, the thriving life of what it is to be alive and creative, to be in the messiness and the complexity of life. And so that's really the invitation of this work. And also the invitation of actually opening up that capacity for complexity in people. And it's interesting because in our work, it's actually less a putting on of more things and more taking things, stripping things away. As Adam said, this capacity lives in all of us as human beings. And it's actually the things that we've covered it over with that we're asking people to let go of so that they can act in accordance, in alignment with that capacity.
Wow. I imagine all of you have had profound moments with your clients and with your own training. And if I were to try to engineer one of those or bankroll one, so let's take money away, let's just take a group that needs you. So pick any of the industries that you work with, and then take away the need for money. I'm kind of guessing, what tools would you need? So I imagine you saying, when we need a forest, we need a campfire or something. Like what are the ingredients for your ideal work as a team with We Are Open Circle? Or maybe you want to just say you can do it anywhere as long as people are game.
That question takes me back to one of the most profound moments of I would say I was a trainer, but I was being trained probably more than I was training anybody else. And this was in a prison in Central California. We were on a sort of honor block, meaning that all of the men in this case that I was working with had a privileged position where they could be in a almost an empty cell block. And move freely within the cell block, so they had extra privileges. And part of that, the requirement for that was that they participated in our program. And so I spent 16 hours with them, 2 8-hour days. And this is if you've never been in a prison, I think you can imagine that they're very stark, concrete walls. Metal, everything is metal and bolted down, like the tables in the courtyard that we were meeting inside the building. And there are guards positioned around. And I was sitting with probably between 18 and 20 incarcerated men. And around the 8th hour of the first day, we were getting into the evening. It was wintertime. And there were these little openings for air. And just the smallest amount of sunlight around the top of this very high ceiling. We can imagine two stories of cells. Mm-hmm. And I started to notice that in this last hour, as the sun was dipping down, we couldn't see the sun, but we could see the light coming through the slats or the openings at the top of the cell block, was shifting across the faces of the men and the wall behind them, right? And we were sitting in a circle around a cloth centerpiece that was checked by the guards, of course, and a couple mementos that these men had brought that were meaningful for them. They didn't have much in their cells, so they brought things like photos of loved ones or something they had received decades before from another inmate earlier in their term. And we were sitting around this, maybe you could consider it a metaphorical campfire, and they were sharing their stories. And it was that kind of intrusion of the world, the light traveling across their faces, that reminded us that we were we were experiencing something very kind of ancient, sitting with each other, hearing each other, men that were from different walks of life, different gang affiliations, different races, sharing their stories, and connecting in a way that just transcended that place. And I, it was that moment that I realized you don't need much. The circle, as one of the men actually in the same prison later in the training that we were doing there said, the circle's already here, we just need to sit in it, you know. And what I think he meant, what I heard was that the elements of listening, of equivalence, of mutual respect, as Miriam said, are already there. They're in our core as human beings, and the elements to make that happen are very simple. So the first thing I would do in a corporate environment, I would sit everyone in a circle. I'd take out, if I could, I'd take out the boardroom table and ask a story like, what's the story of your name? And that's actually how we start most of our trainings, many of our trainings, because everybody has a name. Everybody has some story, even if they don't know the story of their name, it's a story. And that invitation to meet each other in a different way invites us into a deeper humanity, which is very simple and also very profound.
Yeah. Excellent. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Like, what tools do you need?
I was simply going to say the human spirit.
That's all you need.
Yeah. You know, in a lot of, Adam was holding up, he even might have one on his desk, all the Harvard reviews at the moment are talking about, you know, as people have been going through the pandemic, you know, what do they think is like the biggest change, or what they need that's different? And it's humanity, you know. And, you know, to witness, remember one boardroom meeting that Adam and I were a part of, and this was a board that had been together for a few years. It hadn't gone through a lot of changes, and they were going through a very difficult period as an organization. And we just came in and didn't bring any tools except to come in and to give a very simple form of a listening circle practice at the beginning of their board meeting, a check-in, and simply to go around and just check in on their morning. Very, very simple. And after this very, very simple check-in, one of the board members turned around to the person next to him who'd been working together for years and said, I didn't realize that your daughter went to that school. My daughter goes to that school too. It was this connection, you know, that they suddenly, there was this humanity that was brought into the meeting that then allowed them, in that very difficult period where they had to make decisions, allowed them to bring more of themselves into that decision-making process. And for that decision-making process to take in more of what they needed to take in order to make a really discerning decision. And relating it back to the social dilemma, for me, watching that documentary, that was what I took away from it, is that really towards the end, as we were coming towards there, that you had a lot of people with good intentions who were stuck in a business structure that was designed to dehumanize us.
Right.
And the resistance was actually to cultivate in every way our human spirit. And that was the revolution that they were talking about. And this is what we're bringing into organizations, and what we're bringing to people is some processes and some invitations to cultivate the human spirit in what we're doing.
Wow. Can we talk about stories again? I want to go back to that. Do you think that to be a happy, content, or a good leader, or to reach goals, that you need to be a good storyteller or a good story listener, or both? And do you help people sort of with their narratives and that sort of thing in your work?
I want Adam to answer this one, but I immediately, of course, I'm thinking of the binary of the polarization of good and bad. And
right, yes, that's true.
You know, as soon as that invites in, is this kind of critic that's there, kind of invites that critic to come in to say, to judge this is good or bad. And
yes.
I would love Adam to answer it, because I actually learned this capacity through him. It's when we very early on, when we met each other, is this capacity to watch those judgments of good and bad, to be with them, and also to be aware of them, but also to be aware of the way that they assist us and also get in the way.
Right. And so, of course, I right away want to reframe the question to say, tell me about storytelling and its role in all of this.
Actually, that question is the more interesting question. And it's real too, because it's even to say it's bad to think about things as good and bad. You know, it's actually
Right.
another layer of the critic, you know, even in that, it's saying like, oh no, we
Right.
can't have that there. And actually, the practices that we bring in is an invitation just to notice it all. And not just
Right.
to notice it. A lot of the mindfulness work is about noticing those things internally for ourselves. As Kai said, this is also the sort of practices that we're bringing in are collective practices, to notice that internally in yourself, but also to be able to have a means with which to speak about how that interrelates in groups. So as groups, how are we judging each other? How are we, how is that happening? How is that getting in the way of us, you know, getting in the way of what's really important, especially at the moment, is that we can use the unique skills and capacities that we've been given to play our piece in the puzzle. Because it's really clear at the moment that no single person can answer the dilemma that we're in. We need people to work together in a different way in order that people can bring their gifts to the table, and that those gifts can work in synergy to enable us to move through what's here with us right now. And so, yes to the good and bad, and
Right.
yes, acknowledging that.
Right.
Yeah,
Storytelling.
we love like turning questions around, and I was sort of pondering, what do we need to leave behind to be successful in working with a group too? So I want to use that as a bridge. And I think one of those things is like everything that we think we know about that group, we need to leave it behind. All of our expertise in our field, we kind of put it in the toolbox and bring it in, but don't bring out necessarily the tool that we thought we were going to use.
Right.
So just kind of piggybacking off that and
Right.
sharing some of my internal process here. So storytelling, we know scientifically that storytelling is more impactful than data on affecting people's decisions about things and their choices. So that's a scientific fact. I have the data to prove it, but I know more through my stories and what I've experienced in people that it's true. And kind of what we, and I guess what we can see in the world, and we can see in how people share political agendas or try to influence votes through ads, that it's the stories that are used much more than effectively than the data. So on one level, I want to like emphasize that. Now, when it comes to transformation and development, how we work, we base our map of the people that we work with in part on the work of Keegan and Leahy and the human and their developmental psychology. And we focus on three different, when we're working with people individually in a coaching relationship or looking at the culture of a group or an organization, we assess and either formally assess or informally track the developmental stage or ceilings of the individual or the group according to that. And that relates directly to storytelling for us. So socialized mindset, people, you'll get people that they don't know their story, or they don't think their story is enough, or it's too much. And they look for validation from the group or the culture of the group to know that their story matters in that context. And so bringing in a type of listening circle in the beginning, for example, can help people when they hear other people's stories, see, okay, I do have a story to tell. And maybe I'll share that really safe story that I know is okay in this setting in the beginning. And with practice, maybe I'll start to show more of myself. And even that prompt that I love so much, and we love to use about the story of our name. It says, yes, you have a story. You use it every day. It's called your name. And so at that stage, allowing everyone to know that their story matters is empowering at that level, on that personal level. And for a culture, it allows a culture to include all of those identities as they shift and they move and maybe turn into opinions and different perspectives. Then you have a group of people who are self-authored. They know their values, they know their stories, they know that they matter. They know that although they might not matter in every decision in an organization, they factor in. You have a group of empowered people who tend to fall less into the pitfalls of collective folly, the mistakes that groups make in terms of polarization, kind of falling in line for decisions that people might know are not the right decisions, and tend towards collective wisdom. We know that when people know their values, they know their place, they know that their perspective matters, that the conditions are more right for collective wisdom, and they're less apt to fall into collective folly. And we can move beyond that to the level of self-transforming individuals in a self-transforming organization, as people start to see that even though my story might seem completely oppositional to your story, that we can sit with each other and know that we are part of a greater whole and a greater movement. And that in between those stories, not as like a Venn diagram or a negotiation, but in the center of the stories are the relationships that's created through the interaction of those stories, whether we're working towards an aim or a goal or just having a conversation. A third possibility is available to us that we couldn't realize on our own. And so we create that space to sit with all of that, not just to stay there, but to create and to act with that higher awareness that includes things that seemed oppositional or seemed like polarities. So storytelling in our toolbox is a key to helping individuals and whole cultures or whole collectives get to that place where we can include what seemed at one time to be paradoxical, or even at some level to include ourselves in the story.
Interesting. Wow. A lot of the work I do in conflict has to do with how we often cast ourselves as this hero in a story where we're being oppressed by someone, and so being able to take a meta on that to move forward is another aspect of this. I think I'm just coming at it from a different view, but the stories are, and thinking about our stories is so important. Not quick though. So when I think of organizational consultants and learning development people, I think of everybody takes half a day and you listen to the consultant, and then they leave you a few PowerPoint slides at the end and a bill. Your work is more artisanal. It's more like baking sourdough or something like that in some ways. How do you sell this? How are you reaching out to folks who may hire your team and advocate for this process that it's quite different unless folks have been following the human potential movement and so forth? They may find this hard to get their minds around. And I know Kai is doing some of that work, but how do you describe this to others?
Yeah, two things come up to me actually. There's a self-transforming organizations piece that I kind of want to pin, and then there's just like the kind of pain points that people are experiencing that I think this work speaks directly to, right? So the self-transforming organization is like, it's just what you're saying. The classic consultant model is come in, do your little seminar, give some PowerPoint, great. Now what do? None of us actually integrated that back into our system. So will the work last? That's always the question. And so I think that's what this work is about. And that is a selling point in many ways, because what we're offering is like, no, we're going to go in so that you're the ones that are making the decisions, right? Like we're not making any decisions for you. We're presenting ideas and structures, but so you can do that self-transforming work. And that's the personal transforming work, but it's the organizational, it's the communication. All of it unfolds because this work is inherently transformational. And there's kind of that monitoring machine, right? There's feedback systems that inherently build out of that, so that an organization isn't like, okay, cool, we got our model, and then they go on, and then suddenly something else happens and the model stops working because, oh, well, coronavirus just came in and now we're having to work remote. So in that case, a self-transforming organization is like, well, we already have this practice. We have these feedback systems. We know how to listen to each other. So boom, okay, what are sales doing? What are they experiencing? Okay, great. What is marketing experiencing? And there's already that listening that's built in so that they're responding immediately off the feedback instead of these kind of old clunky systems that don't serve in an adaptive organization. So I think that's one huge piece right there. And then at a base level, we ran a session and I had someone from one of the big four accounting firms that will remain nameless for now, but they came in and they did a session, and they had come in pretty depleted, pretty tired. Like I could see it on the face. They were just like wiped out at the beginning. And we had a checkout, and this individual kind of took a moment, like, that was the best part of my day right there.
Right.
And I think there's something really to that. And it's getting out of this idea that, oh, like a mindfulness or sharing circle is kind of, it doesn't relate to work. Well, actually it does. This is something that's built into work, and it can improve team morale. It can help deal with burnout, right? You know, so many people are experiencing Zoom fatigue, where they're just tired of being on a screen, and it takes so much effort to engage with another person, and they're dealing with issues of company culture and how do we maintain all these things. Well, we do this by the deep listening. We do it by caring about each other's experience and creating space for the experience. And even if the listening circle is just about work, inherently by getting to share our stories, I think there is a bit of a release. There is a bit of a restoration and a revitalization that's inherent to this work. So that's it, just like a base level. Here's what you're going through. You're tired of dealing with all these things. Well, this really helps a lot. Right. So just that in its own, I think, is valuable.
I'm picturing this Yelp review of We Are Open Circle that you would all love, and it would be somebody who said, "Wow, these folks came in, but I had to do all the work, you know, but I changed."
Yes,
sort of a complaining sort of thing.
It's actually a sign
that's
that good job. You know, we recently, you know, yeah, it's a sign that we've done a good job if that's the case. Like,
right.
Everything's changed since those guys started working with us, but actually it's this person who's doing the changes, or that person.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
I would love to add something which is from a different perspective. You know, I'm thinking again back, Adam gets a Harvard Review subscription, and he always feeds them through. And I'm thinking back again to an article he sent me. It would have been it was before COVID, so it was like 8 or 9 months ago. But it was about how in droves CEOs were leaving organizations, like because they couldn't find the answer to the problems that were coming up. So this is pre-COVID, and they're facing problems that they've never faced before. They don't have the answers, and they're like going, I'm going, you know. And it's so interesting because what we bring to organizations is actually a disruption in the market, because traditionally in the market of organizational development, there's one bubble, which if you look at all the kind of assessments and stuff, which is leadership development. That's training leaders in terms of how they can do, and also management training is another bubble, but training people with skills and capacities to do their jobs. And then you have here, which is a consulting bubble, which is like, how do we construct the organization so that it can reach its goals? And what we're really doing is conflating those two things. I mean, Kai kind of described it on the ground to say, actually, that separation is a bit like ignoring that, yes, you can treat the liver or you can treat the kidney, but they are in the same body. Right. So we're recognizing in what we're doing that actually the way those two things in the current environment, in the sort of shape of what we're looking for in terms of where we need to be adapting in a different way, where information travels in a very, very different way than it did 100 years ago, that as organizational systems, you actually need to give people in a human system the skills and capacities to be able to adapt. And that means that the organizational development and the leadership actually kind of come into a very different shape in terms of how we're working. And so that's a developmental, what we call a developmental dilemma that many leaders, CEOs, and founders and partners are facing, is that they no longer know how to deal with the problems of the organization. And so that's actually what we're, at that kind of level, we're coming to CEOs and founders and partners and saying, hey, here you go. Let's look at this in a very different way.
Right. A disruptive way. I like that. I'm looking at the clock where I don't want to keep you too long, and this isn't a job interview, but because in the short time I've known Adam and Miriam, and the long time I've known Kaya, of course, I want you to be happy and successful in this work. And since you are creating your story going forward, 5 years from now, we're going to look back and hopefully almost forget about the COVID kind of thing that happened. And 5 years from now, as you reflect upon your work in this area, you know, what sort of healing do you want to bring about to the world? What would be ideal, reflecting on the next 5 years of your really important work with what you're doing?
I was again thinking about the last question, and it'll lead me into this one. If there's a fire, you put it out. You don't
Right.
start planning it for a sustainable forest while the forest is burning down. We don't deny that, right? But once the fire is out, and let's consider that like an organizational issue. Once the fire is out, which we can help with, we start to look at, okay, what does it look like to build not just a sustainable forestry system, or let's call the people in the organization or the trees.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make it sustainable? How do we help it thrive? And so that when we can look back in 5 years or 10 years, not just at that organization, but at the culture surrounding work, and see that it's transformed. So that now we're living in an old growth forest that was sustained by the effort that we made 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago, that is self-regenerating. It's inspiring to the young people that are here and that are coming, and supports all of the life in it and around it. It took us a long time to learn how to manage in hierarchical, top-down, extractive ways. It's not going to take us as long, given the environment that we're in right now, to learn how to manage, lead, work together better. And my hope is that in the future, We Are Open Circle is also forgotten because it's just natural. When you join an organization, there's circles of listening, there's a renewal of vision, there's participatory decision making, there's a way that we listen beyond polarities, and that affects everything that we do. When we go home, when we vote, when we talk politics with our family or with our colleagues, that allows us to transcend where we are now, the fire that we're in now, so that the fire doesn't burn again.
And for me at least, I mean, I totally agree with everything Adam said, but like the term human resources keeps popping up in my head. And it's such a funny thing, human resources. There's like, people have a lot of feelings about HR and what that means, right? And I think it's so fascinating to break that term down of the human quality and then the resources quality. And in many ways, I feel that much of HR work, or just in general, the modern business world, is about the resource. You know, it's less focused on the human and really just on these are our resources, which I totally understand. If you're looking at a budget sheet, if you're looking at just meeting the bottom line, that's kind of how you have to think. So for me, a success in many ways, it's not a removal of that part of it, but it's the balancing out, right? And I think this time during COVID and just everything that's going on is we've realized, we can't separate these things out how we humans love to do, right? Just cut and dry, and the worlds are separate. No, everything just crashed together. Work-life balance, living at home, all these different things. What happens in the world with diversity, equity, inclusion, or racial justice crashes into, capitalism. And so there's just like so many ways in which we are truly interwoven. And so my hope is that this work can promote both, and the rebalancing of the human element and the acceptance of the human element in organizations in the world. And just that acknowledgement and invitation for both.
The poet Khalil Gibran wrote a fantastic poem about work, where he said, "Work is love made visible." And I feel a lot of emotion around this. But my greatest hope would be that in 5 years' time, there's a worldwide movement where there's a sense that putting love and care at the center of what we're doing is alive and well. That would be my greatest hope. And as I say that, I'm thinking about my son and my daughters and Adam's daughter, that they can be invited into a world where that's at our center. because I think that's what we all want.
And I really feel that you all model that with each other. You really seem to be taking care of each other well, which is good. So thank you for modeling that for us. And I'm so glad to be sort of in the same profession as you all, as an ombuds. I hope that you send your clients to if you're working with companies or government institutions that have ombuds, that you'll send your clients out to be listened to by folks from my profession. And boy, I'm really excited about the next 5 years now that I've asked you all about that. Regardless of what happens, I know that you will all be dear, dear friends for into the long beyond 5-year future.